Stigmatization around mental health still exists. When it comes to parenting, they always say there is no single playbook. When your child is growing up and they start to struggle, you can often feel like you're completely alone. Talking about your child's mental health or substance use is not typically the first topic brought up when you're around your friends. Since January of 2023, I've been extending the opportunity for parents who feel comfortable talking about their journey to do so on this podcast. No topic is off limits, and not all stories are positive. This series is meant to be honest, transparent, and real for each individual parent's experience with their child. Please note that this special parent series is the parent perspective of their child's crisis. This is merely one perspective of a single story, and it's important to know that names have been changed for the protection of the parents and the children. These episodes may include details surrounding suicide, self-harm, substance abuse, including overdose, hospitalizations, psychotic episodes, and other traumatic experiences, which include parts of the treatment journey. That includes working with consultants, hiring a transport, wilderness therapy, and residential treatment experiences. All that is to say, listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Parent Series, brought to you by Success is Subjective.
It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
For the past 18 years, Irena worked as an independent college admissions counselor in Palo Alto, California, helping some of the most ambitious and highly accomplished high school students across the country and around the world apply to some of the most highly rejective colleges in the world. She jokes that it helps if you've worked in the Stanford Office of Undergraduate Admission, because everyone thinks you have the inside scoop on how to get in, when in reality, all you have is the inside scoop on how hard it is to get in. That was her public-facing life. At home, her husband and her were struggling to help their 3 children navigate Palo Alto's excellent public school system. It turns out that Palo Alto schools are indeed excellent, but they're not always excellent for students with developmental delays, learning differences, depression, and anxiety. And that was the part of her life she kept quiet for a really long time, far longer than she probably should have, because she admits how off-brand it is to be a sought-after college counselor for students aspiring to be admitted into the T20 schools and have children at home who are struggling. In April of 2023, Irena published a memoir titled The Golden Ticket, A Life in College Admissions Essays. It's an unvarnished account of her life as a daughter, a mother, and a college counselor, primarily because she wanted to explore the unintended consequences of generational expectations. Her Soviet immigrant parents' expectations for her and her husband's expectations for their children, and the expectations that the parents of the students she works with place on their children. But she also wanted to start a conversation about what it means to succeed outside of the conventional, and often narrow, metrics used by people who live in what Jennifer Wallace calls super zips in her book, Never Enough. Irena has a lot of ambivalence about the work she does, and she wants to connect with other educators, parents, mental health professionals, and advocates to call out the ways that the current educational system isn't working and to change it for the better. Clearly, Irena and I are cut from the same cloth when it comes to shaking the tree about expectations around education or what's supposed to happen after high school graduation. So I was really excited to have this interview. Here's Irena. Irena, thanks again for being a guest on the parent series of the Success is Subjective podcast. I'm really excited. We were kind of talking about this offline. We're going to talk about your parent perspective, but we're also going to talk about kind of the professional work that you're doing, which is important to share. So let's just jump right in. Why don't you share a little bit of the backstory of what was going on with your child prior to kind of entering or exploring treatment?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And to jump right in, our oldest son was having a really severe episode of depression as a junior in college, which turned into suicidal level depression, and I would say probably suicidal ideation verging into potentially having a plan. And the very short story is that the day before his birthday, he went, as he now says, or he doesn't say that anymore, but he did at the time, to sightsee off the Golden Gate Bridge, which was part, or on the Golden Gate Bridge, which was part of what he had talked about before. And fortunately, he had his location tracking on, and I called 911. They picked him up and put him on a 5150 hold. And at that point, we had already been exploring wilderness therapy because medication didn't really work. He was just really, really struggling. And so when he was released from the 5150, the psychiatrist who released him actually said, I'm only releasing him so that he can go to a supervised program. Otherwise, I am extending the hold. And so he went voluntarily. He was over 21. And this is by no means a plug for them, but I really firmly believe that it saved his life because it really changed his perspective, gave him a non-toxic, non-online place to sort of reconnect with who he was and do some really deep work. And it gave us the space to stop being in crisis mode and do some deep work on ourselves. So I think it was pretty life-changing.
Well, and I typically ask parents about, like, what were some of the emotions that you were experiencing? And obviously, if you're checking your adult child's tracked location and you are calling 911, you are actively in crisis, like you said, all the time. And that was the break that you got. But is there anything else that you can share, maybe with a parent that's listening that might be kind of in similar shoes right in this moment? Is there any advice that you would give that person right now?
I've thought about this a lot in terms of just giving advice to people or sharing experiences because everybody's experience is so, so different. I think the one takeaway that I can bring to this is a little bit of the frog in boiling water analogy, which apparently is a fallacy. My youngest daughter just told me that is not true, that a frog actually will jump out of the water when it gets warm enough, which shows that we are maybe not as smart as frogs. So the bottom line is, before this break happened, before he was picked up on the Golden Gate Bridge by the California Highway Patrol, he was in very, very serious depression, which also manifested as extreme irritability and combativeness and resistance to getting any kind of help, which is what depression is. So he didn't want to take a medical leave. He wanted to stay in school and finish out the semester, which miraculously he did. But we were on Skype with him, this was pre-Zoom, every single night while he yelled at us and told us this was his fault and that he was going to kill himself. And we would make him promise that he would Skype with us the following night because apparently this works for people who are feeling suicidal and refuse to do anything else, is you make them promise to do something the following day. And he's pretty responsible. So he was like, fine, I'll talk to you. But I don't want to do it. And at one point he actually really cracked us up because he literally had nothing to say when we were Skyping with him. And we said, anything happened today? And he looked at us blankly and said, I'm just here so I don't get fined, which is a famous line from Marshawn Lynch, an NFL player. He has extreme social anxiety. So he just goes to the press conferences and says, I'm just here so I don't get fined, which I thought was hilarious. I'm like, I'm glad somebody here still has a sense of humor. But because he was an adult, we couldn't make him get treatment. But the story that I hear over and over again, like when we went to Parent Weekend at the Wilderness Therapy program from just other parents, when they tell you the lead up to what finally drove them to seek treatment, I always think, and I'm sure they're thinking exactly the same thing about me, what took you so long? How could you have lived with this for months and months and months? And the problem is you don't know what you don't know. And so I would say you can't make your child enter treatment, but you can and should get help for yourself. And whether that's a parent support group or therapy or talking to an educational consultant who might be able to just steer you through, what do you do if you're having this really hard time and your kid is borderline unsafe, but not unsafe. Like, we couldn't call the police on him when he was saying, I'm going to kill myself. I don't think that's an actionable reason. And like, what does that do? So I think my best advice would be you can't make your kid do anything, but you could definitely kind of figure out what you could do for yourself, which we completely didn't because we were so wrapped up in the crisis.
Yeah, I think thank you for just naming that. And like there's so many bits of advice kind of infused in that response. And it kind of actually makes me think about, if you were a parent that wasn't in the throes of being flooded because you're in the crisis, were there any resources that you were able to tap into after that? Like you were able to step back, right? Once your son actually enrolled in the wilderness program, were you able to connect with resources? And what were those resources?
So I think the big game changer is, first of all, exactly as you said, you're not flooded anymore. You're not living in a constant state of hypervigilance and hyperarousal and, sort of suppressed grief, because every once in a while you have minutes in the day when you're like, how is this my life again? Like, what are we doing? While you have to go to your full-time job and deal with your other children and the rest of life. And so just having that breathing space when you don't feel like you're responsible for a human being in crisis who is additional to you, a human being in crisis, just even that breathing space was extremely helpful. And then, of course, once your kid goes to a residential therapy program, I shouldn't say of course, but in our experience, there is suddenly all this support available. So we were connecting with our son's therapist every week to talk just to us about what we were experiencing and the kind of work that she was recommending doing. There's all these reading resources that they recommend. There is a community of parents online whose children are also in treatment and who are all trying to figure out next steps. I will also put in a plug for a support group that I found recently that has been a big game changer for me called OPLM, which you probably know, other parents like me, which is parent run, parent moderated, absolutely no judgment, and a ton of support, and people with kids and young adults in all stages. And I think that part that was also super helpful to me from OPLM that I wish I had earlier is there are people whose kids are in treatment. There are people whose kids are post-treatment. And the post-treatment piece is crucial because once your kid is out, that support sort of goes away. And so I think just having other parents who get it is extremely, extremely helpful, or at least it was for me.
Yeah, I think that's actually such a great reminder of almost like the picturing the journey, kind of like if it was a linear process, like pre-treatment, here you are almost like a frog in boiling water, feeling fairly isolated because you're unable to get connected to resources because you just can't, right? Your emotion brain is what's driving everything. So you can't rationally or logically really take the time to do research and say, I need help for myself. Where do I go? I have no place, like, I don't even know where to start. Then you jump into an actual residential or wilderness program where you are met with a ton of resources. So I'm almost picturing this like bookend experience where it's like you're really isolated, then you're inundated, and then you're almost left on your own once you transition out of like, okay, now what? Now I've lost a lot of those resources, but you're at a point ideally out of the crisis where you as a parent can identify, well, what do I want or need long-standing? And so you can kind of match make that for yourself, but it still takes work, right? And so I'm glad you also plugged OPLM because I do feel like that is an unbiased parent community because it's not program specific, it's parent specific.
Right. Right. And I think it's parent specific. And just to piggyback on what you said, I think one of the things I really, really appreciate about my kids are long out of residential treatment, but the challenges of parenting kids who have mental health or substance abuse issues don't go away when your kid ends treatment. And I think that's one of the things that we talked about a lot in the OPLM parent groups is this initial feeling of you have such profound relief when your kid is done, or not when your kid is done, but when your kid goes to wilderness or to residential treatment, that you're like, okay, this place is going to fix everything. And then we will have a clear window into our future and everything is going to be back on the rails. And one of the moms in one of the groups said, I'm starting to realize that none of these programs, none of these therapists, none of them are the golden ticket. And I was like, oh, I have a book out by that name, but they're not. It's, it will help and it will be a step in the journey, but there's a lot that happens after that. And I think having a sense of what do you need so that you could better parent and better support your kid, and not focus everything on crisis management is super, super important.
Okay, well, I feel like this is a perfect segue then, too. You just kind of planted the seed. You've written a book. I do want to dive into the more professional work that you're doing because I imagine, and you tell me if I'm off base, that your personal experience with your son is also reflected in the work that you do professionally with the students that you're working with. And with the title of this podcast being Success is Subjective, I know you're just like itching at like, Joanna, the idea of success, like, can we demystify what this looks like, especially if we're dealing with young people that are coming from communities that are just so high pressure, high caliber, and really on essentially like a fast track train that we all know collectively is about to crash. But how do we kind of articulate that to parents and the students that we're working with while getting them the help they need? Right. But before we jump into this, I just have one last question, but I do think that you can actually answer this with your like work hat on. When we deal with people that live and work and are breathing, literally being raised in kind of these very, I don't want to say pretentious, but elitist communities, right? There's so much competition. Sometimes it's really hard to then share with others, even closest to us, what we're experiencing if we are struggling, right? If your child was in treatment, were you comfortable telling family, friends, acquaintances? How did that work? So my question for you actually, and again, you can wear it as like the mom hat or the work hat, is if you experienced guilt or shame in like during your child's treatment journey, how did you handle that, especially when you're speaking with other people in your local community?
Right. So that is such a great question. And yes, to both the guilt and the shame and that cognitive dissonance of, you said so many things that I want to jump on, including the fast train that's about to crash. Yes, the sense of absolutely, we move fast and we break things. I live in Palo Alto, which is the center of tech innovation. And the idea is everyone has to be moving fast and hopefully not breaking things, but, advanced placement classes, accelerated this, enrichment that. And so there's a sense of this schedule that everybody has to be on. And if you're not on that schedule, if you're not on that timetable, if the train is pulling out of the station and you're not on it, that is, of course, a catastrophic thing in many people's minds. And I think for me, when my son was struggling, it's not that I was ashamed of him. It's that I think I had lived in this community long enough and unfortunately internalized some of the more harmful messages enough where my feeling was like, well, I'm not going to tell people about this because how off brand is it to be a college counselor who counsels kids who want to get into, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, et cetera, and has a son in wilderness therapy? Like, what will people think? I'm a bad parent. I don't know how to set my own children on the path of success. And it took me a beat, but I realized that having that dissonance inside me, counseling kids, and in fairness, when I counseled the kids who were stressed and pushing themselves beyond endurance to go to one of the schools with a single digit admit rate, I think I infused my experience of just trying to be compassionate, trying to be cognizant of what they were going through, trying to appreciate that their parents' anxiety, even though it seemed totally manufactured and optional to me, trying to have compassion for that as well, because whatever is causing the anxiety is real to that person. I mean, you can stand next to them and be like, well, that's stupid and frivolous. But at the end of the day, they're suffering just as much as you are, whether it's a knife cut or a paper cut or, whatever kind of pain. And so while I think my experience helped me be more compassionate and more insightful for the young people that I was counseling whose struggles were getting into Stanford as opposed to staying alive. I think that keeping something so big inside you and not really having people to talk to except your spouse and your child's therapist is fundamentally really harmful. And I think how that came out for me was I started writing first for myself and then eventually what became a memoir. But I think that the experience with my son, even though I wasn't talking about it for a long time, gave me, I think, kind of a necessary reality grounding that I may not have otherwise had. And I might have gotten right on the Stanford anxiety train more with the parents and the students I was working with. And if I didn't have that perspective.
Thank you for sharing that. So fill us in for folks maybe that are unfamiliar with the work that you do or have not had the fortune of crossing paths with reading your book yet, right? So we'll make sure that there's a link in the show notes for anybody that's interested. Definitely check it out. What do folks need to know? What are you doing?
So I am pulling back from 18 years of being a private college counselor to high school students applying to all kinds of colleges, but predominantly the ones that everybody is in a tizzy about, thanks to the U.S. News and World Report and marketing and incessant articles in the New York Times about how hard it is to get into these schools. Therefore, they must be really great. Before that, I worked as an admissions officer in Stanford undergraduate admissions, which is partly why my practice took off pretty quickly, because people were like, oh, she must know all the things. The truth is, I don't know all the things. I know how hard it is to get in, but I can only work with the student in front of me and try to help them tell their best story. And that was, I love working with teenagers. I love the writing process that they engage in when they start working on their essays and the introspection that they have to engage in. And I really, I think, enjoyed the work for a very long time, with the very dark underbelly of this is an extremely toxic place to be, whether or not you have children yourself who are struggling. But just because the hyper focus on, and to the title of your podcast, success is subjective, right? But almost everybody who comes to see me is like, no, success is Stanford, maybe Berkeley. Like, if I have to, Berkeley's very hard to get into too. That does not make it a good or bad school. But like, literally people are like, my safety school is Dartmouth or whatever. And I think that just having that view of success of where you can get in as opposed to what you make of yourself, who you are, I think is extraordinarily damaging to young people, many of whom have no idea who they are or what they want other than I'm a person who wants to go to this school. It's extraordinarily damaging to their parents who are living with a lot of anxiety. And we haven't even talked about the mental health toll of eating disorders, depression, anxiety, suicidality, OCD. I mean, over the past, I would say 5-10 years, in my practice, that has skyrocketed. And the interesting thing to me is, after writing the book and putting my own experience out there, I had been in this field long enough, and I was fortunate enough to be able to say, I'm pretty sure this book is going to be a mic drop on my career, and that's fine, because I don't know that I want to be in it anymore. And for the first probably 7 or 8 months after the book came out, I was inundated by emails from parents who were like, I read your book. It was so good. All these other crazy parents, am I right? Not me, though. Can you help my kid get into Stanford? And I was like, oh my God, did you read the book? Or, and maybe they did, but it's like so hard to see yourself in it. And that, I think, just reinforced in my mind, if I said what I said in the book, which is sort of in large part about the toll that the single-minded vision of success, and I'm including myself in this, and you'll have to read the book to get the longer story, but the toll that takes on people and families, I can't in good conscience participate in a system that is built exactly on that kind of single mono focus on success. So I am still doing some outside consulting, but for the most part, I've turned to writing and speaking more about mental health, about embracing a broader, more generous vision of success. I have a Substack called The Golden Ticket, parentheses, is not what you think, which is specifically for parents who are starting to suspect that maybe our current mono success focused system is not working well for anyone. And so that's kind of where I'm headed. And I'm hoping also through the Substack and through speaking to really reach parents who are struggling with this idea of, I get it, this is harmful, it doesn't feel right to me, it doesn't feel right to my kid. And then there's that clutching fear of, but everybody else in my community is doing it. And how do I step apart from that? How do I get out of the herd? Because we are herd animals, and it's very hard to be like, no, I want to be the lone wildebeest in danger in the desert.
The audience can't see me, but I am over here like losing my mind, shaking my head feverishly in support of the messaging that you're sharing, because honestly, I appreciate it. And, I'm driving everybody towards the message that you're conveying, because I do think it's going to take a seismic shift in order for parents to not just embrace the awareness and understanding and knowing that their child might need support and potentially change path, but then go against that herd, which is just, it's so much easier to go with, which we know that that's how young adults are too. Even if they have any type of gut check or just a second guess, like, yes, I do want to go to Stanford, but I also just really want to travel the world, but I'm going to Stanford because that's what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. And my thing that I've come up with that is morbid, but I think on point is, the metaphor of course, it's safer to be with the herd, but what if the herd is infected? What if everyone in it has mad cow disease? Like, wouldn't you want to step aside and pursue your own thing? Maybe that's actually the safer path. And the other thing that we haven't talked about, and I'm guessing you see this a fair amount in your practice, and I've seen it both from people I know and anecdotally, the students who actually do, quote unquote, grab the golden ticket and go to Stanford or Carnegie Mellon or wherever, and then come home mid-freshman year in crisis because you can sustain what they've been doing in high school only so much. And then you level up where you go from being in the top 2% of your high school by the skin of your teeth to you're now in a college class where everybody was in the top 2% of their graduating class. And that kind of pressure, that kind of just self-propelling more classes, more this, more awards is so destructive, and it's not sustainable.
I'm not going to toot my horn whatsoever, but I'm just going to honestly acknowledge that the majority of my client caseload is exactly what you just described. Honestly, I think it's kind of a package piece where maybe the parents hesitated, but still felt like that was the path that we needed to go on because the child wanted it and because the parents didn't feel like they could stand up to the local community if their child took a different path. And then I just say the way I describe my caseload is they launched and they unraveled, because it tries to paint a more graceful picture of the reality, which is that high-powered train that either crashed or derailed or whatever. It's ugly, it's messy, and there's so much heavy lifting that takes place for that student and the parents to understand what just happened.
Well, and also I think just really quickly to speak to what you said, this idea of launching, which has become almost mythical. Like your kid turns 18, they toss their cap, they go to college, they're launched. I think that the whole idea of a launch is such a myth. Like it's a spectacular, woohoo, my kid's now in outer space. That's actually not how anything works. In many countries, young people end up living with their parents because of economic considerations or because colleges don't have dorms or because of whatever. My kids are on a very, very different timetable than a lot of their peers. And it has taken all of us years to embrace that, because trying to be on somebody else's timetable really does not work well for everybody. And I think just a gut check, what are you doing every day? Are you happy? Are you feeling like you're living a sustainable life? Or are you going to bed miserable at 3 a.m. because you had to finish all your homework, and then you're getting up at 6 a.m. because you have an extra swim practice? And you can't live like that, and it probably doesn't feel good. And it's better to listen to that earlier than later.
Irena, I feel like I could probably spend another 2 hours just chatting with you, but like digging into some of the other like analogies or messages that you're conveying to parents at this point, trying to really like redirect, open their minds, redirect and expose them to alternatives, especially like you said, you spent so many years helping a certain student and now it just feels almost contradictory in terms of the work that you were doing and the message that you're now pursuing or pushing.
Right.
But I want to just say thank you. If you're okay with it, honestly, I would love to schedule a follow-up to dive more deeply into that messaging. What are some things that parents can be doing? What are some things that young people nowadays can be looking at instead of those top 20 or single digit acceptance rate schools, and kind of just exploring again or demystifying what success needs to look like?
I would love to talk about that. I have so many thoughts about all of those things. So let's do it.
Perfect. All right.
Okay.
Well, Irena, thanks again for being a guest on the special parent series of the Success is Subjective podcast. And I'm going to hold you to it. We're going to circle back for part 2 where we're talking about success.
Sounds good. Joanna, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guest for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. Put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you are interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email Joanna at joanna@successissubjective.org. Be sure to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you are listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe to the show. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener-supported, made possible by our team and by you. You can support this podcast by joining the Patreon community at patreon.com/successissubjective. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.
Do you have a teenager or young adult who seems to have lost their way? Maybe they need help navigating adolescence, adulthood, and decisions surrounding higher education. Or maybe they have become withdrawn, their grades are slipping, or they are flat out living a reckless lifestyle, and you're concerned about their health and well-being. If this describes what your teen or young adult is facing, a therapeutic consultant may be able to help. Mental health, addiction recovery, and higher education can all be equally expensive. While information is everywhere, how do you know what option is the best one for your family? Some parents have the time to research and navigate this on their own. Some don't. If the latter applies to you, enter therapeutic consultants. Therapeutic consultants, like Joanna, listen to your family's specific needs and advocate on behalf of your loved one. TCs will research therapeutic resources, recommend treatment programs, and assist during adulthood transitions. Not being affiliated with any program, their support is completely objective and catered toward the best interest of each unique family. To find a qualified therapeutic consultant to work with, check out TCA, also known as the Therapeutic Consulting Association. Their website is therapeuticconsulting.org, all one word. Again, that's therapeuticconsulting.org. Then click the Find a Pro tab up at the top.